Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast of Real Recovery. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Welcome to Real Recovery. So glad you joined us tonight. Bill Arnold on this side of the studio, and just across the way, George P. Fraser. Hello, George.
Punt patents and kick winner. I kind of messed that up.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. That was when you were 9. We are under contract to talk about that twice a year.
Yep, and we got that out of the way
again
this year. Yeah, it wasn't like I'm 12 and, got pennants of sports teams. That's another show. I'm really looking forward to our show tonight.
I am too. The show we have planned today.
Hopefully I could
get that out
better. Yeah.
It's going to be a little unusual because we're giving our guest a lot of time to speak and tell the story, because it is going to be riveting.
We've been doing this show 13 years through the grace of God, and I can't think of a person, well, there isn't one I know that has helped more people find Jesus and get sober and have a relationship with God than our guest tonight.
Yeah. And what an interesting beginning. It's interesting how God has you doing one thing, and then he all of a sudden has you doing something else.
Well, and you meet this person and you think, okay, average guy, the danger that's coming, the odds against you that are coming. If you listen to one show of Real Recovery this year, listen to this one. It inspired me. I know it inspired you and Ryan as well. And when I look at it, Bill, we always do a step on this show, and we're getting it out of the way so he can talk, but it's step 3 where we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand him. And, of course, we understand him to be Jesus Christ. When you turn your life over to God, and for a lot of us, the addiction was the route we took, and God brought us back through his power and his grace and his mercy, and it sustains itself in us by our dependence on him rather than dependence on ourselves and other mood-altering substances. I don't know of anybody's story that you'd go, why would you do that? There's no way that would work. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and you look at what God did through him, a man being obedient at a great cost to himself and his family and his little kids. This is must-see TV tonight on this show.
It is indeed, and it also involves a lot of courage and fearlessness, and those are 2 things that I have great admiration for when I see that in other people. I want that for myself.
Well, I'm a air-conditioned Christian, and when I hear this story, it inspires me. So please put your seatbelt on and get ready for God to speak through this man. And we got to see this from the outside. We didn't really know the story. And the way this came about, I know you've spoken at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge.
Many times, yeah.
And you and I did a few years ago, and I never got invited back. But, who remembers that?
I did get invited back.
Yeah.
You didn't.
Many times, and I never did. But, of course, I don't have a resentment there because I'm so mature. Yeah. Anyway, I sat next to him at a table the other night for a fundraiser for one of our good friends who has Lost Sheep Ministries, Dave Johnson. And I said, he goes, I really love Real Recovery. I go, really? You listen? He goes, yeah. I go, would you like to do it? He goes, I'd be delighted. So we are delighted, and what you're going to hear is worth your time.
Mm-hmm. And there are parts of his story, and George and I feel like we've got an advantage because we've read his book that he has.
I'm reading it. Almost.
You're reading it, yeah. And that gives us a little bit of an advantage as we talk about him being on the show tonight. But it is a page turner, George. You can't stop.
I can't, no.
Yeah, so good. All right, that's what is ahead, and I love the recommendation, George, you gave. If you've never, if you listen to one show this year, listen to this one. It's pretty strong.
Well, I like it's true.
All right, so let's take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to bring on Pastor Rich Sherber to our show, and I'll just give you a heads up. The name of his book is When Waters Stir, The Miraculous Journey of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. So we're going to take a break and be right back. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for getting ready for what's ahead. Welcome back to Real Recovery. So glad to have Pastor Rich Sherber on the show tonight. George, this is going to be an incredible show.
Well, you and I have both worked in the business with Salvation Army, and we saw a lot of this, but we did not know the depth of this until we read the book. Thank you so much for doing this. You have our full admiration and respect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be with you guys and listen to you all the time. We love Real Recovery, and the connection with KTIS goes back
long time,
from day one.
Yeah.
They've been a great asset.
Rich is also the author of When Waters Stir, The Miraculous Journey of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. It is a page-turner.
And the scripture from that, what is it, John 5:8? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I wrote the book and called it When Waters Stir because in the book there's so many descriptions of when, like in the Old Testament story, when the angel came down and stirred the water, the first person that stepped down in that water, and oftentimes it was a suicidal mission to step in that water because many of the people were, near paralyzed or what. And when they stepped down, the first one, God honored that and miracles happened. And today God is still stirring. And when his Holy Spirit moves on our heart to do something and we obey, things happen. And that's really been the story over and over with Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, George and I have popcorn. We want to hear the journey. We're going to sit back and enjoy hearing the journey of your life. You were a former missionary in Africa. And explain to everyone what happened with you and your family.
Okay. Well, I could start early. I got involved in I didn't grow up in an evangelical Christian home. I knew nothing of the word saved or knowing Christ in a personal relationship. And I ended up, when I was 12 years old, stealing my dad's booze. And then it went on to marijuana and then harder drugs. In my early 20s, addiction had caught up to me. It wasn't fun anymore. I was a long-haired hippie drug dealer. And I was on my way to a drug deal one night out west of the Twin Cities in Buffalo, Minnesota. And we would go there in the summertime and take drugs out to the lakes areas, parties, and I was on the downtown area where they call Wide Street, and there'd be 200-300 kids that meet on the weekends, and then they would wait and get the drugs and booze, and we'd go out to parties, and so I was sitting on that street with a half a kilo of marijuana and a whole bag of pills, and someone came up and started witnessing to me, and my first words out of my mouth was, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe any of this," And a half hour later, they challenged me. They said, "Give God a chance." And I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I prayed with them that night, and God made himself so real to me. I went home the next morning. I'd been growing marijuana plants under heat lamps. I cut all my marijuana plants that I had transferred. I had heat lamps into a swamp area. I cut all my marijuana plants down. I took all of my drugs and put on a great big pile, and I grabbed about 2 gallons of gasoline. I poured all over it, and I, all by myself that day, I said, "God, I don't know who you are, what you are, but for real, take these drugs out of my life and I'm sick of it." And God came and he made himself real to me, and people started telling me that there was a call on my life because I went back to the same people who had led me to Christ and on the streets, and after several months, dozens, maybe, I don't know what, I think they said there was like 70 young people came to the Lord through that outreach on the streets in the 3 months' time, and I was one of their first converts. And I started sharing the gospel with all my friends, and they told me, they said, "You got a call, you need to go to this Bible school." And my brain, I'd flunked my way out of school. I was dealing drugs out of my high school locker, and make a long story short, they wouldn't let me in college. I had to go get my GED, and they put me on a contingency. I could only take half of a load, and I had to have a C average. And my brain was so fried from drugs, I just couldn't do it. And after 1 quarter, I quit school. And I got an opportunity to travel with a ministry that worked on Indian reservations and migrant labor camps in some of the worst drug-infested neighborhoods across the country. And they had a great big tent, and they did outreach, street ministry. And I lived in the back of semi-trucks and trailers for almost 4 years doing that. And it was a very difficult time. During the years that we did that, I never was paid a nickel. I just have felt, it was a call on my life. And then I met my wife, Lynette, and God definitely put us together. And one of the first things she said is, Rich, you need to go back to college. And I said, no, Lynette, I can't do college. I'm dumb. And she said, you are not dumb, and I'm going to help you. And I ended up going to a college called Northwestern. It was out actually in Seattle area. And in Northwestern University, and I ended up graduating with 1,000 kids in my class on the dean's list. I did a 4-year degree in 2.5 years, and then I went on. After that, I went on to the University of Wisconsin, worked on a master's degree in psychology and counseling, and I pastored in Minnesota for a number of years. And me and my wife have always felt this real call to Africa, and we. After pastoring for about 7-8 years, we applied to the missions organization, and they basically, they're a very large missions organization. They said, you're a first-term missionary. We don't want to send you to too much of a violent area, or we want to be. You got 2 little girls. One was a year and a half, and the other one was 3. And they said, we don't want to send you to any area that's going to be hard on your family. And so they started mentioning some places, especially in Africa, where we could go that'd be nice and comfortable. And I can't explain what happened, but every place they mentioned, it was just in my spirit and Lynette's, my wife's. It was just like no. It was like we had ate something foul. And after 2 hours, and I kept saying no. And finally, this is the honest truth. I told them, I said, listen, send me where nobody else wants to go. And they said, are you serious? And I said, I don't care. Send me where nobody else wants to go. And they said, there's a near civil war in South Africa going on right now, the apartheid. And they said, we can't get anyone to work inside those black townships to do evangelism. Would you be willing to go? And they said, we'll give you a large tent. And I said, I'd be thrilled to go. And the hard part was, my mother, after I had become a Christian, had come to the Lord. Actually, many of my family members came to the Lord, and they were a little bit hesitant when they heard we were going to be going to 4 to 5 years overseas in Africa without coming back. But when my mother heard that we were going to be working, and I was going to take her 2 little granddaughters into the violent black townships of South Africa, my mother hit the roof, and I've never seen her act like that in my life, and she threatened me. She said, I will break relationships with you. I'll never talk to you. And she said, you cannot take these precious grandchildren of mine into that violent place. And she said, these children will be scarred for life. She said, you can't do this. She said, they're going to end up emotionally scarred. And I said, me and Lynette talked to her, and she wouldn't change her mind. And finally I said, listen, I'm going to honor God, and we're going. And you will have to, deal with God on the consequences. But I said, God called us, and we're going. And I say all that to say today, I have 2 wonderful daughters that are near 40 years old. And both of them are medical doctors and world changers. My one daughter has actually been on Real Recovery here, Holly Geyer. She's an addiction medicine specialist with the Mayo Hospital.
She's brilliant, by the way.
She wrote the only book on opiates for the Mayo Hospital system. She was invited on CNN News last week. My other daughter is a hematologist and world changer. She is a brilliant. And I say all that not to brag on my daughters, but what was hardships in South Africa. I mean, we didn't have birthday parties to send my kids to, and we didn't do, my kids suffered, and my kids learned to be tenacious and to persevere and live under hardships. And this is what has created them into what they are today. They're, and I say this all the time at Teen Challenge that, when we thank God for hardships because they make us into something that God can really use. So we served.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yep.
After going through that with your mom, did you question yourself at all? Did you ever think, hey, maybe she's right? God, what am I really?
Maybe God's speaking to me through my mom.
Yeah.
Did you think that?
I love my mom. She was very, very
Clearly.
special. Yeah.
Yeah,
and,
clearly.
That's why I even mentioned it, 30 years later, it still was a pivotal point in our life. I was determined that we couldn't let anybody talk us out of it. If God was in it, then and by the way, I served for 5 years working inside those black townships of South Africa, some of like Soweto and other places, the most violent black townships during the darkest hour of South Africa's history, going on months on end without seeing another white face other than the South African police. I seen people necklace. That's where they put tires around up to their neck and light them. Anybody that was a sympathizer with the South African government was necklaced. I seen violence in those back townships, but God sent us there, and it's amazing. Some of the crusades that we had, we did about 45 to 50 crusades, many of them for a week on end. We had several very large tents that we had, and the crowds, sometimes you could not see the end. And thousands of people would come.
Wow.
It made no sense whatsoever other than God did it. And I'm not I don't boast to be a popular speaker. It was just God did it. And, people responded to an American coming over in love, and there were hardships too. And we had our house broken in several times, and in South Africa there were more violent rapes of white women than probably anywhere else in the world. And during the time we were there in South Africa, that was a ultimate revenge to the white men, and yet. My kids were in those black townships all the time, and my wife was there, and God gave us favor and grace. And after 5 years, and we don't know how many people, but tens and tens, and thousands of people came forward on those altars, and lives were transformed. We built 14 churches when we were over there, and after our first tour, we came back to America, and we were visiting all the churches that were supporting us through the Midwest. So I was going to Wisconsin and Chicago and North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, everywhere. And after we were supposed to spend 12 months here, and then they were going to give us 1 month to do a vacation. I promised my kids we'd take them to Disney World. And then we were going back to Southern Africa. And so we had 9 months. And we had 3 months left. And one day I got a call from a pastor who said, "Rich, can I take you to breakfast tomorrow morning?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Show up and bring your wife with." And he said, "Show up at church at 7:30 in the morning." I said, "Well, what's this about?" And he said, "I'll talk to you in the morning." And so Lynette I got off the phone, and she said, "What's that about?" And I said, "I don't know, maybe they want to support Teen Challenge. I don't know." So we showed up at 7:30 in the morning in South Minneapolis inner city church, and as I walked in the foyer, there were 7 men sitting around a table, and they said, they see me walk in, and Lynette, and they said, "Rich and Lynette, come here, come sit down. We've been waiting for you." And I said, "I thought we were going to go to breakfast." You said we were going to go to breakfast, and they said, "We'll go to breakfast later." And I didn't know about half of the men on the table. And they said, "Have you ever heard, Rich, of Teen Challenge?" And I said, "I remember 6 years ago, before we went to Africa, that they were trying to start a Teen Challenge in Minnesota. And I heard that they were going to try to start a women's seminar in St. Paul on Summit Avenue." And one of the board members interrupted and said, "Well, that home has never happened, and the money they raised is all gone." And they said, "Before we can say anything more, we want you to read this." And they threw it on a front page of the Minneapolis Star Tribune. It was a story of a minister who was being charged with, there were by 2 different women being sexually sued or whatever. And it told a little bit about the organization that was being sued. And then when I was all done, they said, that's our Teen Challenge director. And they said, this is the situation. They said, we're meeting this morning to decide whether we should file bankruptcy. We're a board of directors. They said the ministry is $30,000 in debt. And they said, we have of everything that we can find. And they said, we have no assets except a Kirby vacuum cleaner. And they said the home that we had in St. Paul that raised all that money, that's all gone. And there's nothing left of the ministry. And I said, well, what does this have to do with me and Lynette? And they said, well, Rich, would you be interested in taking it over? And I said, well, what does it pay? And they said, there's nothing here to pay. There's nothing left of the ministry. And I said, well, what an honor. What an honor. Yeah. I mean, jeepers. I said, is this real? Is this a joke? And they said, and I got the giggles, and a couple of the other pastors were giggling. They were this board of directors, and they when they were done, we looked over to one of the guys who was at the table and was all teary-eyed, and he was one of the pastors who had worked at the church, and then he interrupted and he said, listen, he said, the reason I'm so moved for this ministry, he said, I'm one of the pastors, he said, that worked on staff here with the director of Teen Challenge, and we had a Teen Challenge office up in one of the Sunday school rooms, and actually you could hear the phone ringing up in that Sunday school room all the time we were in the meeting, and he said, since this moral failure, he said, I've been answering that phone because there's nobody else to answer it. And he said that phone has never stopped ringing with hurting people. And he got all teary-eyed, and he said, Rich, he said, we need a Teen Challenge. And he said, you came out of addiction. He said, you got a master's degree in counseling. And he said, you're just perfect for what we need. And he said, would you pray about it? And God was all teary-eyed and emotional, and I said, sure, we'll pray about it. And they went back to their group, and they were talking about their little business things and about paying bills and stuff. And so finally, we just excused ourselves. We were only with them for 15, 20 minutes, and me and Lynette went home. I got home probably by 8:30 in the morning, and that day I sort of forgot about the Teen Challenge offer. And not every night, me and Lynette, before we go to bed, we pray. And that night we prayed that God to get us back to Africa and raise our budget. And at the end, Lynette prayed and said, Lord, if there's anything with Teen Challenge, show us. And we went to sleep. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, and I could tell that Lynette was awake. And finally I looked at her. I said, Lynette, what's the matter? And she sat straight up in bed, and she got all choked up. She could hardly talk. And she said, Rich, I haven't slept one wink all night. She said, I've never been so burdened in all my life. She said, I think God wants us to come off the mission field in Africa and start this Teen Challenge. And I said, Lynette, we come off the mission field, we lose our support. We have nothing. She said, I'll get a job teaching, and you start Teen Challenge. And we, from there, George, you've read a little bit of the book. We had nothing to start with, so I started with an old condemned house in South Minneapolis. It was an absolute nightmare, and the worst part is that so many churches that were supporting Teen Challenge, they were just done with Teen Challenge after, the negative publicity and everything. And so we can tell you the rest of the story over there.
It's a fascinating story.
Stunning.
Oh, it's amazing. Pastor Rich Sherber is our guest. We're going to take a little break and come back. You're listening to Real Recovery with Bill and George. Ryan's on the board. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real Recovery. Bill and George. We have Pastor Rich Sherber as our guest tonight. His book is When Waters Stir, The Miraculous Journey of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. Rich, I have to say, this is an amazing story, amazing journey you're taking us on. So you are back in Africa. You were just telling us the story of how God just gave you grace.
Yeah. Well, I was during the intermission here. I told you both how the first Christmas that we had only been in South Africa about maybe 2 or 3 months, and we were staying in a large like a hostel or a compound that was about a quarter of a mile, the eighth of a mile from the border of Soweto. And it was our first Christmas, and I'm over there, and most of the whites speak Afrikaans, and they're not happy because we're there helping the blacks, and we're to get oriented where we're going to go, so it was Christmas Eve. We're missing our family. We're going through culture shock, and the worst part is that there were sanctions from the U.S. government on South Africa, not only just the U.S. government, but most of Europe, even parts of Asia. So you couldn't buy car parts, you couldn't buy a refrigerator. If it wasn't made in South Africa, you were limited, and we were living on $850 a month, and I started to question, did I really make the right decision here? And it was Christmas Eve, and we called our family back in Minnesota from South Africa, and now it's so different. Back then, I think it was $35 or $40 for a 5 or 10 minute phone call, and I'm living on $850 a month, and so we had our little Christmas with the girls, and tried to make it as happy as we could, and we weren't happy, and in the background, honest, you could hear we're right next to the Soweto border, and you could hear the gunfire, and you could hear the screaming, and you could hear the rioting on the streets that was going on that night. And we were close enough that you could hear it. And it distracted everything. And after we had our little Christmas, I asked Lynette if I could go in the bedroom, and I fell on the bed. And I began to just weep, and I said, God, I can't do this. I can't bring my kids into this. I can't. And it was just like the Lord just gave me grace. And God said, you're in my will. I'll take care of you. And that was a breakthrough for me, because the next 4.5 years, we were in those townships every day, and the miracles that happened were miraculous. And then God brought us back to the States and asked us, right before the break, I told a little bit how God brought us, told us to take over Teen Challenge. And by the time we left South Africa, I mean, the pastors from throughout the country were begging us to come back, because I was building churches and I was holding tent crusades, and they were preaching and things were happening. And I mean, I went into an area, the missions organization I went through to hardly had a church, and by the time I left, we had more churches than anywhere else in South Africa, and so we were popular. And now we're taking over this Teen Challenge where there's nothing, and it was shortly after we took over Teen Challenge, we started with an old condemned house in South Minneapolis. Actually, the board chairman for Teen Challenge was sitting in a coffee shop in South Minneapolis, and he heard a man say that he had this guy had, I think, a pretty vulgar language. He was, I don't, what I'm told, he was pretty rough, but he said, I have a blankety blank fourplex in South Minneapolis. I wish I could find a blankety blank charity to take it. And this board chairman said, listen, afterwards he said, I don't know you, but he said, we're a charity and we're looking for one. And so he tells the guy, we'll take it. And so this board chairman calls me up and says, Rich, we found you a house, and you need to go over. This guy wants to show it to you. And so I got in my car and I drove. I knew a little bit of Lake Street at that time, but I drove down first. It was First Avenue heading south off the 35W, and then near Clinton Avenue, right near the corner there I passed the largest strip joint and pornographic bookstore and peep show in the city of Minneapolis, and there are people sitting on the corner, and right on the next street is Clinton Avenue, and I looked on the street, and half of the houses are boarded up there, and there's a guy standing outside, and I pull up to the address, 3021 Clinton Avenue, and hear this guy standing there with a clipboard, and he said, here, you can sign here. And I said, I don't really want to sign anything. And he said, listen, your board chairman said, and he got really angry with me. He said, your board chairman said you're taking this. And so I signed this quick claim deed, and now we own this fourplex. And the next day or a couple of days later, I got the building inspector over there to look at it. And the building inspector started, and I had but a crowbar because it was all boarded up, and was going to go in the front door and take the plywood off, and the building inspector said, no. He said, you don't need this. He said, follow me. And he walked down the alley along the side of the fourplex, and there was laying next to a fence a little stepladder, and he said, just follow me. And he put that stepladder up against one of the pieces of plywood that was on hinges, and he said, this is their door. He said, they're using this as a crack house and for prostitution. He said, we know all about this place. And so he walks inside, and he's yelling, City of Minneapolis, anybody here, get out now. And I mean, you can't imagine the filth and how this thing stunk, and it had been boarded up for years. And he said, let's start on the top. And he started from he said, you're going to have to, it was a flat roof that had been leaking for years. He said that you have to replace all the roof and all the floors. And he said, this is, and the windows are bad, the plumbing is bad in here. He said, and the gravity stove in the basement, everything, he said, has to be redone here. He said, you don't want this house, Mr. Sherber. And I said, it's too late now. I said, we signed the quitclaim deed. He said, boy, can you get out of this? I said, I don't think so. And we're stuck with it. And I look at this now here. One of the largest centers we have in Minneapolis is just 2 or 3 blocks away from there. You've been there, Bill, and God knew.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that where that place should be. And make a long story short, the next months Teen Challenge had nothing. I had nothing, and in the book Windwater Stir, I talk about how I would take little tools that I had, living on $850 a month, and then our salary had stopped, and what little savings we had, we'd go to the Kmart, and I'd buy a skill saw and a table saw and hammers and whatever, and I'd go work there, and oftentimes, most of the time, because it was so much work to come bring those tools in and out through that window, I would leave them there, and multiple times I came back and all my tools are gone, so somebody was stealing my tools, and it was the biggest discouragement because, I mean, it was just month after month of churches were not willing, a lot of them, to stick on and support the ministry after that moral failure. And make a long story short, it was almost a year, maybe, or 9 months later, after working, and we hardly had money for the demo permits. And the city of Minneapolis is putting pressure on us to start construction. I don't have money for it. I don't know. And one day I found some guys came to me who work for a company owned by a Christian man. It was a heating contracting company, and they said, we want to come and we want to volunteer our time. And so they gave me the name of the guy, and I went and seen him, and he said, listen, Rich, he said, so I went, I said, the reason I came to you, I said, any chance that you could donate a heating system for Teen Challenge? He said, I know all about Teen Challenge. He said, I actually support David Wilkerson. I said, well, David Wilkerson isn't helping us on this, but I said, we're trying to resurrect it. And he said, well, we're going through a real hard time. I can't donate a heating system. I said, well, some of your guys came to me, and they said they want to help donate work with. And he said, well, I don't think the union is going to let that, Rich. And then he said, well, we're going to come and give you a quote. I feel like I'm going to really help you. Like God wants me to really help you. And I said, well, thank you. I said, you're an answer of prayer. I said, I can't get anybody out there. And anyhow, so I never heard back from him for a long time. Actually, he did come, I guess, and looking but then it took a while to get a quote back, and I had got 8 or 9 other heating contracting quotes, and I was starting to get plumbing quotes. They were coming in at $10,000, $12,000 heating coats, $12,000. The new windows were about $20,000, and new roof was about $30,000. I mean, it was adding up, and Teen Challenge had nothing. And I was trying to raise money and trying to do the demo work, and I just kept getting more discouraged and more discouraged and more discouraged. And it was the middle of the summer. And it was one of those heat waves like we had this last summer. It was near 100 degrees, and I was working inside, and I would, inside one of the rooms, pulling lath and plaster off a ceiling. And
the worst job ever.
The worst. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And that plaster is heavy, and that's concrete
Yes.
and sand. And I was pulling off the ceiling and running a 2x6 up through the joists, and the plaster come down, hit my head. I'm bleeding all over. It's so dusty in there. I'm standing on about 3 feet of glass and plaster, and
it's hot.
And it's hot. And a lady comes in. She said, "Rich, we got the heating contracting quote you've been waiting for." And I said, "Well, praise God." And when she ended up leaving, and I opened the heating contracting quote from this Christian man, and thinking that this is going to be the light at the end of the tunnel. After I read the quote, I realized out of the 8 or 9 heating contracting quotes, this guy's was the most expensive. And that was a breaking point for me. I just had month after month of discouragement, and I threw in the towel, and I tore up that heating contracting quote, and I started weeping, and my weeping turned into, honestly, I think I had a mini breakdown. I wept so hard that the muscles in my stomach 3 days later hurt, and for 15 minutes I sobbed, and I started screaming as loud as I could, "I hate this Teen Challenge. I hate this Teen Challenge." And finally I said, "God, I'm done. And I'd made up my mind. I'm done with this. I just hated it. And I said, "God, why did you brought me off the mission field for this?" And I'm so discouraged. And about maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes later, I'm sobbing, and snot is in my nose, and it's so dusty in there. And I hear in the back door someone yelling, "Anybody here? Anybody here? Anybody here?" And I yelled, "Just a second, I'll be there." And I walked through this maze, and I'm still crying a little bit. And out in front is standing a guy in a white suit, I think it was, or a nice new suit. And he said, "I'm looking for Rich Sherber, the director of Teen Challenge." And I said, he could tell I was broke up, and he actually wrote a book on his own life, and he said that this was one of the more dramatic stories is when he ran into me, and I said, "I'm Rich Sherber, how can I help you?" And he said, I own Centrair Heating in Eden Prairie, and my name is John Kepke. And he said, "I'm looking." He said, "Someone asked me to come down and give you a quote." And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we want to take this house and we want to use it for guys that are coming for long-term for drug addiction." And he said, "Well, what's your budget?" And I said, I was trying to explain to him, I said, "Well, we don't have a lot of money, and we're trying to do this on donations." And he said, "Well, do you get any government money?" And back then we got nothing. I said, "We had we're going to run this like a mission." And he said, "So how's your donations coming?" And I said, "It's horrible." And I started weeping, and he looked at me, he said, "Mr. Sherber, how are you planning to do this?" And I broke down, and I started weeping, and I don't know, 30 seconds later, I looked up and I said, "Mr. Kepke, I guess we're going to have to believe God." And I started weeping again, and I looked, a couple minutes or so, I look up at him, big alligator tears in his eyes, and he said, "You're doing all this to help these people?" He said, "I'll tell you, the least I can do is donate a heating system." That was the beginning of miracles. From there, I think we counted in 2 or 3 months' time over $70,000 miraculously just started coming in out of nowhere. And we got that house open. That was the first miracle. And the book called When Water Stirs is just a story of many, many similar miracles that we've seen at Teen Challenge when God has brought us to we're despair, we couldn't do it. And he shows up, and he's so faithful. And today, Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenges, they have 18 campuses across the state of Minnesota. They have over 800 some employees, and God has blessed this. We are one of the largest residential drug rehabilitation programs, secular or Christian, in the state of Minnesota.
Absolutely fascinating. We're going to take a little break and be right back with Pastor Rich Scherber as we continue hearing the amazing story, not only of his life, but the story of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge here in Minnesota. Be right back. We are back with Real Recovery. Bill and George, what an incredible story, George. Pastor Rich Scherber here is in studio with us, and it is gripping. And his author of the book, When Waters Stir, The Miraculous Journey of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. What a page-turner that book is.
I'm reading it right now. Can you get that on Amazon?
No, but if anybody calls Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, if you call the development or ask for the development department, they'll send you out a free book.
Nice. Sweet.
Okay, that is so great. Bill, I had a question here before we move on, if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
There was one of the stories in the book, and I got to tell you, it's fascinating, but there was a guy who stole some of your tools. Can you tell that story?
Yeah.
Please?
So if you were listening earlier, you heard me mention that we had nothing, and I would come back in the early ages when we were first working on the first house, and we would I'd leave at night, and I'd leave my tools. There's hundreds of dollars worth of tools, and I came in the next morning and find my tools are all gone. And this happened, and then it happened maybe a couple times, and then for probably a month, I would start carrying all my tools home, and it was such a burden. I was wrecking my car, putting table saws and everything in my small car, and finally I just decided that I'm going to leave them there. I'm going to hide them, and I think it happened a total maybe 3 or 4 times. That I hid them, and sure enough, it came back one of the times, and they're all gone. Well, here it is now, 25 years later. This happened about 5 years ago in a Teen Challenge staff meeting. We're a big organization now. We had hundreds of staff in our auditorium, and they honored me for 25 years back then. So that was 10 years ago. They honored me for 25 years of ministry at Teen Challenge. And at the end, they were ready to close. One of the directors, Terry Francis, asked if he could get up and say something. And because I see one of the staff, an African-American staff, was talking to him, whispering in his ear, and then he asked if he could say something, and he came to the front, and I said, sure, and he came to the front from the microphone, and he said, Ronnie Williams, who is one of our head chaplains at Teen Challenge, and everybody loves Ray. He came through the program and is he's also a pastor in South Minneapolis, incredible leader, wants to say something, but he's too embarrassed to say it. So he asked me to say he wants to ask your apology because he was the one living right next door to you during the time you were building the Clinton house, and he stole all of your tools multiple times over and over. And all I could say was, I'll give 1,000 skill saws, table saws, power drills for one Ronnie Williams.
Beautiful.
Great story. I'm wondering, is somebody listening to the show, because that's what Bill and I have been doing for the last hour. It's so good to hear God's story in you, and your obedience is really encouraging. I'm listening tonight, and I'm in and out of recovery. What would you say to me?
That's a reality. I don't care if you're a Christian or a non-Christian. People in addiction relapse. And when I first started Teen Challenge, I was very judgmental. But boy, I'll tell you, we've seen tens of thousands of people come through, and more times than not, I see them come through multiple times. And I'm always there. My office used to be, and Tom, the new director, CEO of Teen Challenge, his office right near the front door where the admissions lobby is. And I did that purposely because I wanted, every time I seen somebody who not only was new, but those who were relapsing, it's so hard for people to come back and say, I need help. I was there to shake their hand, and many of them crying on my shoulder and say, we are welcome. We're honored that you're here. And if you're listening and you're struggling, hey, you're no different than anybody else. This is a battle. That's why they call it recovery. And you need, the reality is, though, you can't sit in your addiction. You have to somewhere step up and say enough is enough. And you can find victory. It's a battle. It's a hard battle, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I just can't give up.
I love that. I've always looked at my addiction as a gift, like Paul's thorn in his flesh.
Yeah.
And the encouragement that Bill speaks every week at the Salvation Army to the men there. Most people don't make it, and we want to make sure everybody gets saved. And you're so inspirational to see. I can't see God, right, Bill? Mm-hmm. But I can sure see what he does. And I thank you for taking the time to come here. Thank you for going to the fundraiser dinner for a friend of ours a few weeks ago. Your presence there helped immensely.
Oh, no.
And thank you for just your life serving God. It's truly incredible.
Rich, there's so many, both men and women, that attend Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge.
Yeah.
And there are so many lives that have been truly transformed because I've been able to witness it myself.
Yeah.
And there is nothing like someone who is trapped in an addiction, enslaved to sin, and then by the power of the Holy Spirit, they are set free because they've placed their faith in Christ, and the power of addiction has been broken in their life, and they're able to move forward in a way that they couldn't have imagined ever.
Yeah.
And do you ever tire of those stories?
Oh, man. So on Sunday, I was at my church, and they some of the Teen Challenge ladies showed up at the church that we in Lynette attend, and afterwards they were in the short-term program, so I didn't know one of them. And so I was talking to some of the ladies, just encouraging them, and Lynette was talking to one of the other ladies, and then she got out in the car, and she couldn't talk. She started to weep. And she said, "We get the honor, Rich, of helping people like this." And she started telling me this girl's story and how her brother was stuck in addiction. And literally on his deathbed, he said to his sister, "Go to Teen Challenge. That's where you need to go." And he ended up dying in his addiction. But just the miracle God's doing in her life and so many lives, you never tire from that.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I've spent some time at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, and one of the things that I see always when I'm there is this outpouring of love. And I've talked to some people who were in the program, and they said, I came kicking and screaming. I didn't want to come. But boy, when the doors opened, I had an outpouring of love upon me that I thought, wow, Lord, this is where I'm supposed to be right now.
Yeah.
And so the power of love that you guys share, and I know it's the love of the Lord that you're sharing, but it is so real and so authentic, and that is exactly what somebody needs, Rich.
Yes.
Yeah. So what a story. Pastor Rich Sherber has been our guest tonight, and the book is called When Waters Stir, The Miraculous Journey of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. And tell our audience one more time, Rich, how someone can get a complimentary copy of this book.
If they call Teen Challenge at 612-373-3366 or 612-FREEDOM and just ask the receptionist, they would like to get a copy. And someone in development, they should ask specifically for development.
Nice. Well, that phone is going to ring. And I've got my signed copy. George, do you have a signed copy?
No, he didn't sign it.
Yeah. Well, I've got a signed copy.
Like you, I got a free copy. I'm sure you didn't pay for it.
Yes, I did too.
Yeah.
That's all the time we have for today. Again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for telling others about real recovery. Have a great night. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.